5 hosts, 4 divisions, all battling it out for the Holy Grail of the American Hockey League, the Calder Cup. This is the Holy Grail Podcast. Here are your hosts, Zack Power, Andrew Rinaldi, Corey Swartz, and Dina Weinheimer.
Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, if you're hearing that, we here at the Holy Grail have a special little thing here for you. It's of all the excitement going on for the playoffs, this one is especially dedicated to, well, the other side of the coin. This is the kind of a bit of a somber note because we are going to be eulogizing big old obituaries for all of our beloved teams here. But I wouldn't be anywhere without my pallbearers here. I will let them introduce themselves.
I'm Corey Swartz, and I feel like we're that meme of those guys with a coffin where they have it up on their shoulders and they're doing that little dance you used to see everywhere. I can't think of what that's called, but, that's basically what we're at right now, and I'm here for the chaos. So if you got eliminated, we're going to have some fun.
And I'm Zack Power. If you're a Marlies fan, you're already dead inside because you know that your team has no playoff hopes. But at least you weren't San Diego.
They're not dead yet, Zach. I mean, just because you're on life support doesn't mean that they're already got to start writing up their obituary. Jeez, wait for the body to get cold at least.
Yeah, there's still a pulse there, man. Sheesh.
Oh, whoops.
Anyway, we're having fun with our special episode on this one. If you couldn't tell, just kind of going over what went right, but also kind of what went wrong for a lot of our sideline watchers, our participation trophy havers, and unfortunately our kind of 6 feet under teams this year in the AHL that, well, eight of them. There's 32 teams in this league. You know how
you know what? No, there's no respect here, right? Okay. You're in the Pacific Division and you couldn't get one of the 7 freaking spots of no, there's no respect. There is no respect.
We're going hard in the paint early on here. I love it. All right. So, I mean, do you guys want to start off with like who was eliminated first? Because that would be interesting. Or I think our format of just going division by division has always worked out well. Let's take a look at that Atlantic division, and we'll start. I mean, we'll go in with the great poet of our times, Drake. We start from the bottom, and that's going to be the Wilkes-Barrie Scranton Penguins. Corey, you have a great insight on the Atlantic division. We always seem to defer to you on everything Atlantic. If you could eulogize the Baby Pens, what went wrong?
Everything, honestly. I mean, it's hard to really pick out just one thing that went wrong for these guys. I mean, it's a shame because they really started off well, right? Like they seemed to have their goaltending figured out. They had, some offensive prowess. They were one of the teams that had one of the strongest starts in, the month of October, especially, I believe, was, just they were a team that was really on my radar as like a surprise, kind of Cinderella team. And, even into November, they were looking fine and things just started going wrong, right? Like, we've seen how it ended for the Pittsburgh organization. The Pittsburgh didn't make it. Wilkes-Barre didn't make it. Not even Wheeling made it. It was an organizational miss this season, just from top to bottom in Pittsburgh. And it resulted in, some people losing their jobs. Ron Hextall got fired the day after the season ended. So did Brian Burke. I believe he's, the man above Ron Hextall, in the stand, the positioning there. But for Wilkes-Barre, it was just a trickle-down effect. I mean, they lost Sam Poulin, one of their rookies, for, so long of the season. And, again, it was mental health, it was something he desperately needed to do. And, that's fine. But, the Penguins totally missed his production. He had such a sensational start as a rookie, at the beginning of end of last season. He just looks like a big piece of the future. Dustin Tokarski, Philip Lindbergh. Lindbergh is just he could not stay healthy. Here's a guy that had a ton of promise coming into his career. You think back to last season in October where he was the goaltender of the month, I believe. It was either goaltender or rookie, one of the other, way back then. And just injury has just plagued this team. And, they were able to field a competitive team. I say that as, someone looked at it from a Hershey perspective. They always gave Hershey a run for their money, it seemed like, no matter who was in their lineup. And, if there's anything good that's kind of come out of this season, they've kind of found some diamonds in the rough. Justin Adamo is one that I believe they signed to a contract here recently after he came up from the ECHL. But the positives are few and far between. And I expect there to be just a radical overhaul of, their entire roster. I wouldn't even say coaches are safe at this point, although I think JD Forrest is a guy that you want to put in charge of an up-and-coming team, as they surely will be by next season, I imagine. I think that he's been, a great coach for them, great find. But again, it just wasn't meant to be. And you've heard it here on the podcast week after week. I kind of said, they're a dark horse. They're a dark horse. They could come back. They can make this happen type of thing. And maybe I was just trying to, rub it together and, shock them into life again and say, clear and, bring them back to life type of thing. Because it's a team that, they were scary to play against for so long. And it was just very hard for me to believe that the perpetually competitive Wilkes-Barrie Scranton Penguins that hardly ever miss the playoffs, even if it's not for too long, are just that they're dead and, nobody could bring them back. And surely it wasn't going to be Pittsburgh that brought them back because they just kind of took whatever teeth they had and sat them on the sidelines for them to not make the playoffs in the final week of the season. So I feel bad for them in a sense, not too bad for them, of course, but their team, they're not going to stay down for long. I said it on Twitter, a couple weeks ago when they were talking about it. Wilkes-Barre's a team that you can put them down, but they won't stay there for very long. They're resilient. They're competitive. They're, many things, but a sideline team is not one of them. So it's a rare position for them to be outside looking in. It happens to everybody once in a blue moon, but I expect them to fully bounce back next season for sure.
And joining them in the realm of the past and playoff contention is the Bridgeport Islanders. Now, I feel like this is solely the case of being named the Islanders and not the Sound Tigers anymore. When you kind of strip down your identity like that, well, they lost their soul along with it. And you know what? It's hard to stay alive without a soul. But I did have a chance to talk with our resident Islanders prospect expert, Nicole Sherman. She allowed me to, kind of pick her brain a little bit and kind of was a little more optimistic in the dissection of the Sound Tigers. You know what? I'm not even going to give them. If you make the playoffs, then I'll give you the respect of calling you the Islanders. You're the Sound Tigers. And I mean, maybe I'm just trying to manifest a little more positivity for them. But, she really pointed out how the vets really led the way. And, Chris Terry was a huge point producer. So the vets really kind of led the way over there in Bridgeport. You had Chris Terry, who was in the tops of the league scoring. Andy Andreoff was first in goal scoring. And when I took a look at it, I was completely blown away that the Islanders actually had the most goals for in the entire Atlantic Division. Like, that's not a joke. Ruslan Iskakov was third in rookie scoring. I saw incredible flashes of skill and shootouts and everything. I mean, just absolutely filthy sets of hands. And it just blows my mind even more. Like, you guys you just got to stop a puck. Like, it blows my mind. Last year in the playoffs, Corey Schneider was a wall against Providence, and that propels them to an upset win. But now, like, all of a sudden, they can't stop anything. Like, the Islanders in the NHL are so renowned for their ability to stop pucks, and down here in the A, it's just an absolute dumpster fire. And it's amazing that with all that offensive power that they couldn't just stumble their way into one of those spots. But Nicole was high to praise. A lot of the youngsters, I mentioned Iskakov before. William Dufour, he transitioned to pro hockey and has looked really good. he's still got some steps to make in his skating, no pun intended. But really looking promising there in Bridgeport. Samuel Bolduc is another one who, it just never kind of quite broke through the roster last year, and his defensive decisions have left some question marks. If you couldn't tell, with the 248 goals against, how do you have the most goals in the division? You still have a negative goal differential. I guess that's why this is your eulogy here. But next season you got some question marks with Corey Schneider likely retiring, so you might be seeing Tristan Lennox in there. Naturally talented and gifted, and he's going to need to be if he's going to be facing these kinds of shots and goals coming up against him, because that looks kind of a little rough there. But again, I just want to give a shout out to Nicole. She's been keeping tabs on all these prospects and has decided to impart some of her wisdom there on me. So it made me sound a lot more in touch with Bridgeport than I actually was, when really I'm just sitting here going, stop a puck, just stop a puck, and you're in there instead of Lehigh or Hartford or all that offensive talent. Really? Chris Terry was my MVP in the Wheel of Fate. He's not even going to the playoffs. So what's going on here? So
no, and the one thing with them, Andrew, is consistency, right? Like, this is a team that flirted with being as high as third place and, threatened to be even higher at different points in the season too. And suddenly they just fell off. Like you said, they couldn't stop a puck. I hate to throw their goaltenders under the bus a little bit more, but Jakob Skark did not pull through for them. Honestly, it was just a total struggle for, he'll be the goalie forever known as the guy that his only accomplishment is that he shut out the Bears and teddy bear toss night. That's going to be his own. That's going to be the banner that they'd hang up if they could hang up a single banner. If they had anything to hang up, that's about it. Honestly, it was just one of those things. Chris Terry, he set a new career high in points this season with 78. You have a lot of the guys you mentioned, they just blew the roof off of it scoring wise. But whether it was team defense, whether it was goaltending, they got outscored. They got into track meets in a lot of their games. There's just so many times where, the amount of times that they could pull off a convincing win like they did towards the end of the season when it didn't matter. They went on a little bit of run after they got officially eliminated. They got beat up by Wilkes-Barrie of all teams, 8-2 in the game that officially sank their ship. If you want to know, and neither Corey Schneider got pulled after 5 goals. Jakob Skark allowed 3 in relief. This is just, it's a team that's not even built to get eliminated in the play-in round. And, then they go on this great run. Chris Terry scores 10 points in 3 games to get that AHL Player of the Week nomination at the end of the season for the Howie's Hockey Tape. I believe it is the sponsor for that. And, it's just not enough. That tells your tale almost in one entire sentence right there, is that Chris Terry is just doing everything he can there to single-handedly haul his team in there, and they're not responding to him. So they have a good foundation. I think they may have Chris Terry already under contract for next season, if I'm not mistaken, at the AHL level. So, he's a player to build around and, get a couple of those pieces in. But it's just such a shame that they just, they fell off there, because they looked like an elite team at one point, and now they're just, they're hitting the golf course early, and drastically early too.
So that was our Atlantic, Corey. So if that was so bad and you just want to roll over and die, how about this? The podcast will set you free and you can leave the funeral early. How about that, buddy?
All right. Sounds good. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
I'll talk to you guys next
see
week
you in
then.
the next life.
Or next episode. Week. I'm sure it'll be here again soon.
This is so bad that we have to finish the funeral by ourselves.
I know.
I even just kicked him out of this whole stream. He didn't even get to say goodbye. And you know what? Probably for good reason, because everybody else, there were some pretty bad teams in the Atlantic Division, right? And I do think that, but I also do think that there's a couple bad ones in the North, man.
Ooh, we got some bad ones in the North.
And I'll start off. Okay, let's start off with Belleville, because I think that there's something that needs to be said about Belleville. And how many
goalie?
Well, this is the thing. I'm just going down. I'm trying to find the final number on how many goalies that they had in the run of a year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 goaltenders they've had throughout the whole year. That's amazing. 4 of them were rookies.
Oh,
And I think that kind of says a lot about the team that Ottawa has right now is that they're just in this constant perpetual rebuild, right? And or whatever they're trying to do nowadays, right? I don't even think that they're trying to rebuild. And I kind of look at that and you know what? No wonder you didn't make the playoffs, right? You didn't give any help. But hey, they had a better season than Tucson on paper, right? And you know, when the points mattered the most, they lost 6 of their final 10, right? They went up against the Toronto squad, which they were supposed to beat. And they got routed by a Toronto squad that they were supposed to beat. And we talked about it like 2 or 3 episodes ago. And I said, you know, these guys are going to play Toronto like 6 times in the next like month. They got to beat them 5 times, right? And they just didn't do it. The Marlies outplayed them like it was nobody's business. And had they not lost like 7-1 in the final game of the season for them, they actually might have come close to getting in, but like it wouldn't be so embarrassing for them as it was. And I think that's kind of the headline here is that that was the way it was the whole season, right? They couldn't find wins at all on the road, right? But at home they had no problem. So I don't know. I like it's another mystery of for me Belleville on what they were trying to achieve, and that comes from the parent club as well. Is you ask yourself, what am I doing here? Am I rebuilding or am I just like, what am I doing? I don't and second of all, I don't know how you go through so many goaltenders. I get there's the injury bug on both sides, and the Marlies, look, they weren't perfect either. They had a load of them as well, but I don't know how you do it.
their only qualified goaltender was the empty net. That's not a joke. There's been a lot of funnies made during this episode, but that's not one of them. That's like a legit. You can go up and check the stats.
I did not know that.
Their qualified goalie has a 13.14 goals against average. That is the empty net. 10 shots against, 10 goals against. It's Belleville was one of those teams where I thought like could kind of sneak through, especially right. You mentioned, you got the Toronto team that's really been on their heels lately. They can kind of sneak in there. Then Ottawa's like, oh, that top scorer you have, yoink. That promising young 20-year-old goaltender you have, yoink. And it kind of just, I feel like the coaching staff, I mean, they had a mid-season coaching change, and just they can never really just kind of find a stable enough ship to really kind of sail themselves in. And it was a very gettable playoff spot there in the North. They just kind of fall short. And there's another team that fell even just a little bit shorter than that. It was the Cleveland Monsters, those lovable monsters over there on Lake Erie. They didn't quite get it done, but we have a bit of our own eulogy for them. You want to get into that, Zach?
Yeah, and our good friend Dina Weinheimer wrote this, so I will read this and quote: "The team that could, they had been given what they needed to succeed. That's how I'll forever remember the 2022-23 Cleveland Monsters." She said, "You heard me talk about it until it was quite literally red, or it was the wine and gold in the face on the endless stream of call-ups by the Columbus Blue Jackets this season. Seriously, though, the 563 man games lost, which is quite absurd," she said. "Here's another number for you: 210. 210 transactions between the Cleveland Monsters and the Columbus Blue Jackets dating back to October 13th. This team didn't stand a chance on paper, but they almost did the thing. They almost curtailed every expectation, defied every odd to make it breathtakingly close to the 2023 Calder Cup playoffs, she said. Standing in their way were the Laval Rocket, who managed to go on a streak at the worst possible time for Cleveland. Leading the way was Trey Fix-Wolanski, and side note, she loves Trey, and for good reason. Trey was a very good player, and still is.
Friend of the pod, Trey Fix-Wolanski.
Yeah, friend of the pod, and for good reason. And who set numerous franchise records this season and had a career best 71 points, 29 goals, 42 assists in 61 games played. Think about that. A goal per game player on I want to say a low-level team who didn't make the playoffs is kind of hard to come by, right? Or at least I can't think of any. She continues to say, I won't be surprised if I'm writing a eulogy to his AHL career in a few months as he graduates the NHL. Overreaching this stomach-churning season, it was the story of redemption versus first looks. While you guys had like Josh Dunn, Carson Meyer, Tyler Angle trying to make names for themselves in a seemingly deep Columbus Blue Jackets prospect pool, you had David Juracek and Roman Hahn and Marcus Bjork all making their first and very good impressions in North America. I don't envy the new coach in Columbus, she said, in having to decide who to cut next season. The 2022-23 Monsters were terribly short on experience, but always full of smiles and humor off the ice. The youth in the coaching staff somehow worked well to a competitive team most nights, which even when they were more ECHL call-ups and PTOs than actual bona fide AHL teams, honestly, though, all credit needs to go to their head coach, Trent Vogelhuber, a true player's coach, and the ability to be tough when it's needed. And let's face it, this team sucked mid-season, capital letters and bold, she said, underlined, and I wasn't surprised. It's a routine for them to have a performance collapse in December and February. And what defines them isn't that. It will be the way that they rebounded after the All-Star break. So maybe they need to put away their cloning machines unless they're cloning more Treys, Davids, Carsons, and Joshes. Or maybe the 5-hour sun delay in the truly defining moment of the roller coaster season that they had. Yona Luoto's horrible is an honorable mention for sure. But like that sun, an already bright March, Ohio day, the sun too has set on the 2022-23 Cleveland Monsters. Who to say it best than Dina?
She's always got the right words for the toughest situations. And on a somber note, we wave goodbye to the Cleveland Monsters.
And the glass Columbus Blue Jackets at that. They can kiss goodbye to their season.
Yeah, I blame a lot of their problems on the Blue Jackets, but as we kind of get away from a bit of the somber tone, let's get a little mean again because we're going to the Central, and oh man, I've been waiting for this one because I have been going on about this all year long, right? I mean, I every time I keep talking about my who's not, it's just my beats, talking about the knots, my beats. Well, here it is. Finally, of the 7 teams in the Central, 5 of them get in. I only cover 2 teams. Guess who didn't get in? It's the 2 teams. We're going to start again at the bottom, like Drake, with the Grand Rapids Griffins. Now, last year, coming off of this disappointing non-playoff season, there's a bit of expectation seeing that you had a number 6 overall pick coming over from Europe. You got another great young defender in Albert Johansson coming over and making his debut here in North America. You bring come from the Olympics, you bring gold medal winner Jussi Okinyora to kind of backstop in your net. Bring some veterans in like Austin Zarnik, Matt Luff, Joel L'Esperance to kind of fill in the depth and, kind of really get this team going. And, they not talking about not even like get going. This team never really got started. I mean, I can remember back in October being down at the bottom of the standings and they just dropped like a anchor and just never really got into the picture at all, at least not seriously. By December, you're down in the bottom of the standings, and they would sometimes get a little bit of momentum, but that they could never. Consistency was such an issue for this team. You win the first one of a back-to-back in a series, and then you drop the second one, or vice versa. You lose and then you win, and then you lose and you lose and you lose, and there's just. We thought goaltending was going to be a little stronger this year. I mean, I wouldn't say stronger, but it was going to definitely have a different dynamic. You lose a veteran like Calvin Pickard, it's hard to just okay, we're just going to run it back. But Olkinuora was, oh my Joe, just couldn't get it together. And then Victor Bradstrom, unfortunately, I think by virtue of just not having another goalie to kind of push him to be better, just kind of didn't really find a lot of the consistency that he had in the second half of last year and just couldn't find his footing. Now, things started to stabilize a little bit when Alex Nedeljkovic cleared waivers and spent a couple months there. But by that point, now Detroit's calling up this guy. We're calling up this guy. We're calling up this guy. And it happens in this league. You get a lot of call-ups and injuries. Cross Hannes was a guy who was depended on for depth scoring. He gets hurt and can't. And his season, unfortunately, ended about halfway through. And it was just the consistencies and the compete just wasn't there every single night. Sometimes you get a team that like they would have this knack of falling behind really quickly and then battling back. But they would fall behind so much all the time. And sometimes teams just like, if you fall behind against Texas, they're just going to clamp it down and you can't have a 3-goal comeback against the Stars. They're way too good for that. Milwaukee, they're just going to suffocate you. Manitoba is just going to fill your net with pucks. And it was just, you can see why the Griffins let their coach go. His contract was up. It was time for a different voice in the room. And there's a big gut check for a lot of guys in that locker room and in the front office. This is a team that the fans show up every night for, and they have a winning culture here in Grand Rapids. I mean, there's a reason why a guy like Brian Lashoff has spent his entire career in this organization. And the fans deserve a winner. Like these 2 seasons in a row, no playoffs. It's tough.
And I remember watching them and thinking these guys just fall apart at the seams at the slightest inconvenience is let's just implode.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no will.
And I know they're like, by this point, the season was long done, but this past weekend I was in Chicago, right? And you figure, go out on a high note, right? Come on, just give us one. Knock out your rival out of the playoffs, And the first couple of shifts were actually pretty good. Like, they came out flying, had the feet under them. They take a bad penalty. Chicago scores on the power play, and the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. They give up 3 power play goals in the first period and enter the intermission 4-0. And that rest of the game was so boring. I wish I had brought a pillow up into the press box because you could tell that. It was a tough situation. With Brian Lashoff out of the lineup, they had dressed only 5 defensemen. Simon Edvinsson was hurt. So Tyler Spezia is out there playing defense. He's normally a forward, but hey, you know what? We'll just like, there's just the whole attitude like, hey, we'll just throw him out there. Like, who cares? It's the last game of the season. It doesn't matter. And it was just a microcosm of the entire season where these guys come out and they play well, but that one thing, you just take that one Jenga block out and the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. I don't know why I use the house of cards and Jenga metaphor in the same. That's on me, but it's just very difficult for Grand Rapids. And well, maybe greener pastures on the horizon, but we'll see about that. I will bring you all of the news as soon as they find out who the coach is going to be. But for a team who does know who the coach was, and the team that actually made really good strides, the Chicago Wolves. One of the this is unfortunately not a eulogy that's going to be nearly as funny as the last couple have been, because this team was, unlike the others, was really good the last couple of months of the season. Just playing their best hockey right when it mattered. It really it was the first couple of months, unfortunately, were just so putrid, like 6 wins in 2 months, putrid. And it's a lot of it's, health. A lot of the veterans that they brought in, Mackenzie McKiker and Ryan Dzingel, were hurt. Pyotr Kochekov's up in Carolina for half the year. It's hard. Zachary Sawchenko was admirable in that, but then you throw in Cale Morris, 5 goals against average Cale Morris, up 6-2 to Grand Rapids, and you lose Cale Morris. That's a difficult situation for any team. But for all the youth that the Wolves had, they, after the All-Star break, really turned around. Max Leauge was a monster, a defenseman winning player of the month in February. And they had some real momentum going down the stretch. Unfortunately, it was just a case of they kind of took a dump in Rockford in the last week of the season, and which left their destiny up to other teams. They were in a playoff position on Sunday. Unfortunately, Iowa and Rockford win. Chicago goes from champs to watching on the sidelines, not even getting to participate in the playoffs. Not only that, but now you're looking ahead at a really strange offseason. No NHL affiliate. First team that's done this sort of thing in almost 30 years. It's going to be interesting. But that's for the next life. In this life, we're going to put the Wolves into the ground. A lot of life. They lived out those golden years beautifully, but unfortunately, they just couldn't get past those junkie days that they lived through in the 20s, and so that kind of came back to haunt them in the end of the day. So yeah, my beats, love them to death. But this was my heartfelt eulogy going out to them. It's tough. I didn't expect this. It's not great.
Yeah. I was kind of doing a lot of thinking about this, right? And, don't even deserve to tie.
Oh, gloves are coming off now. Look at that. I've never seen Tylus Zack Power. This is a first on the Holy Grail, people.
Let the chest hair out for this
one.
one.
I was about to say, the little chest hair you got going on?
It sure is, buddy.
Oh, my God. Oh, no.
and you know what?
Sorry, ladies, he's not single.
The thing is, this is how I felt like the San Diego Gulls were. Just laid back, partying it up. Come on, get me, right? I don't know, right? Statistically, the worst team to ever step foot on American Hockey League ice in the modern era. They won 29% of the game. So the last time these guys won at home was a game against Henderson on March 11th. That was the last time. The last time they won against a team that wasn't at the bottom of the league at home, Henderson, second to the bottom, was against Tucson on the 14th of February. The last time that you won at home against a real team.
With Tucson, you're a little liberal with the word real. But I'll allow it. They are a playoff team. I'll allow it.
San Diego lost 12 of their last 13 games. They gave up. I just, you had this beautiful goaltender. Like, think about it. Lucas Dostal was hands down, in my opinion, one of the best maybe not hands down, close to hands down, one of the best goaltenders in the league, and put up a 912 save percentage on a team that,
on
you know
this
what,
team.
I'm going to say it. They probably didn't deserve to have him. And some strange stats I'll throw at you. Dostal, the team let up the most first period shots or saves, I guess, in the first period. That was on the 4th of March, rather. 24 saves, by the way. Right? They had some of the worst penalty numbers in the league. In fact, number 2 for most minor penalties in a game. 14 minor penalties. You let up 14 minor penalties in one game. Penalty minutes close to most, 65 in one game. Right? It was a team that, you know what? There's something to be said about, hey, you went in and you won a game versus Iowa. You won a game versus Milwaukee. You won a gold medal, right?
They, I forgot to mention in my Griffins eulogy, they only went 500 against the goals. 2-2, baby. 2-2. Oh man, I forgot about that. That was, to be fair, they opened up the season against San Diego, and then there was another series in November. So it was early on in the season. There's been a lot of not great hockey that I've covered since then. But what are you doing going 2-2 against that team?
Some more weird stats for you. They had the least amount of shots for by any team. And that was actually by a landslide. They averaged 26 shots per game. The next highest, you might know these two actually, Chicago and Grand Rapids, who both averaged 28. They gave up the second most shots for, actually the most, surprisingly, Springfield, believe it or not, in a 72 games season. 32 on average. Goals for, dead last. They average about 2.5 per game, and they average about 4 goals against per game, despite having one of the best goaltenders in the league. Their power play record stunk, shooting at about 15%. Penalty killing wasn't bad. They picked up some late prospects, and it just wasn't enough. And I think that there needs to be more to be said about this team, and there will be. One day on the Field Pass Hockey Network, an article will pop up, and you'll say, wow, I remember this team being so bad. And it gives me shades of Henderson. And I will say one more thing, because I did have this stat lined up as well. Going into Christmas, it was all Cole for them. 7 wins, 22 losses going into Christmas break. They finished the season with 20 wins. 16 of them were in regulation. 49 losses, 2 overtime losses, and a shootout loss. Which reminds me of Henderson, who they were no better. They started at the end of October 1-6. Right? They tried at the bitter end of the season and won 5 of 6. You want a cookie, right? I said at the beginning of the season that it had to come down to goaltending, and it had to change. It just had to change, and it did. But did anybody else around them look up and say, maybe I'm the problem? Right? Michael Hutchinson came in there and helped him out for a bit, but, at the end of the day, even Laurent Brossoit, an NHL caliber goaltender, couldn't put up decent numbers. He barely got over 900. Michael Hutchinson didn't get over 900. NHL caliber goaltender, right? Yuri Patera, 911 save percentage. Nothing's there. And who did they have as a leader? Name one. I'll wait. Sheldon Rempel? Sure. I'm sure, 63 points in 70 games, fine. Whatever, right? But like anybody can be good on a team who's terrible. And that's simply the way put. I don't know what else more to say about this Henderson team. Like nothing ever seemed to work out for them. And I don't know if you have any other comments before we go to San Jose, but I'll say this. It wasn't the fault of the coaching of San Diego, and I really do believe that, because I think congrats to a great career for Roy.
Mhm.
Henderson, maybe they were left out to dry by Vegas and their farm system. They have been. They will be, right? And you know what? There's better days to come for the both of those.
I just want the phrase anyone can be good on a bad team on a plaque, and that can be kind of like on top of the headstone for the Henderson Silver Knights. I mean, yeah, I feel like they're the big names that I saw in this team were quickly scooped up. Pavel Dorofeyev, yoink. Braden Paschal, their one representative at Laval, yoink. And Vegas is like, that's, you get a taste of that, but we need them up here, and you guys are just going to kind of really suffer. Like it's a tough Pacific Division, and if you don't stack up that team, and like no offense to Kyle Marino, I loved him in Chicago, but when he's seeing a bulk of minutes in your lineup, like you got some holes.
And you know what? And even San Jose, it's their own fault they didn't make the playoffs, because the Pacific Division allowed itself to have a sub 500 team get into the playoffs. I want you to remember that as you go into the playoffs, right? They allowed a sub 500 team go into the playoffs. Who loses more games that they win and makes it into the playoffs?
Tucson.
Like, I don't know what else to say, man. Like, they suck.
I can't wait to do our eulogy. We get no eulogy for Tucson. There's still the pulse.
Yeah, no, that was the other episode. If you just finished listening to that episode, you came here, you're hearing two different Zack Powers. And you know what? I can't wait for the eulogy for them, because they really deserve to be on this. And if the playoff format, and I'll say this again, if the playoff format wasn't so stupid, we wouldn't have had this problem.
Yeah, I think maybe you can cut down on one of those teams and have just two play-in series, because I mean, I remember last year, right? San Diego was, instead of that like that tilapia at the bottom of the ocean, they were scrappy, and they had a little bit of spunk to them, and they ran into Ontario, who was just an absolute machine, and you tried, you got a participation ribbon, but you got dummied in 2 straight games. And so, like, I get what these teams are going for. They want their prospects to play meaningful hockey. But I also think that you kind of got to not suck in order to get into that advantageous position. Like, I can say that, there's a lot of teams added in there, but Iowa in Central or Rockford, they deserve to get into the playoffs. I know I've grilled Rockford a lot about their lack of regulation wins. That's kind of in the realm of a San Diego, which kind of should disqualify them by proxy, but they're at least at 20 now, which is more than I can say about the Griffins. Anyway.
And I wish too, I'll say one more thing before we go to a little surprise for San Jose. I wish that I could personally, physically, or know how to find better records than the modern era, right? To find out who was statistically the worst team, because it might just well be the San Diego squad. You know what? It's not even close in the modern era, at least. Not even close. It wasn't close a month ago, and San Diego's gotten worse.
Right, the games have stopped mattering to them. And he just mailed it
And they
in.
lost also for good reason. Glad he's happy. But someone who also did lose is San Jose, and we'll go to. And earlier we talked to a very special guest. Andrew will introduce it in some less depressing times. Let's hear that.
All right, fans, we have a very special guest for you this week. She is going to help us kind of break down what's going on over there on the West Coast. If you've ever seen any awesome tweets from the CUDA page, well, you're about to go see what we're going to lift the curtain behind the mask here. And here we are, very pleased to introduce our guest this week, Lizz Child. Liz, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on. That was a heck of some hype there coming up.
Well, I mean, it's deserved. It's very deserved. I mean, I've loved following the CUDA page all year, and you've done an incredible job, kind of not just bringing us everything that's been going on with the team, but also just the personality really shines through on that. And so I just got to commend you one more time. And if you don't follow the CUDA page or Liz, I highly recommend it. So if you could, Liz, just kind of, for those out there who aren't as familiar with your work, just kind of give us a quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah. Well, as you said, I've been running the Barracuda social medias this season. It's been a heck of a ride. Did not start my season planning on this. I was just being a beat writer for the team. And then things went down. They said, hey, can you help us out? I said, absolutely. And here we are today. But for the most part, I got my start writing about juniors, and that's still, where my main writing beat is at the moment. Got a little busy this season just because of how much stuff the CUDA had going on. And man, it came down to that last 2 weeks. It was a wild ride, but yeah, I mean, everyone's social media. I have my own personal account that somehow I never shut up on. And then I have a team account that I also never shut up on. So
well, that's the pretty cool thing about the Barracuda account is they do talk a lot of smack. Is there a certain team that you like to talk a lot of smack to?
I'm going to say the Ontario Reign are probably the team that I give the hardest time, just because if you've ever seen us post and just be like, oh man, your glass issues. Oh, there's another delay in Ontario. Your glass is broken again. But they can dish it back just as well. And I appreciate that. But also the Colorado Eagles, you got to give it to them. They are far and away probably the most responsive and most entertaining in terms of just making fun of everything and having a great time. And not just with us, like with any team in the division, any team in the league. But I would be remiss if I didn't shout out, it's not talking trash, it's not being mean to them, but CUDA besties, the Iowa Wild, you gotta shout them out. Hoping, sorry guys, I know that, Central Division, but hoping to see the Iowa Wild go fairly far this year. So we'll see.
Well, it's not like the Wolves are going to be in their way anymore because their season is done. So I can respect that.
Understandable. Yeah, no, that's basically how I'm feeling. I'm sitting here like, who should we root for? And I'm like, it's Iowa. Come on. We know it's Iowa.
So as we kind of turn to look at the CUDA this year, improvements from last year, but we are going to have to write a bit of an obituary for the team here. So we had boards on to start the year off. It kind of felt like there was a lot of good vibes. And then what happened, Liz?
Injuries, call-ups, and moving guys around. It was an interesting start to the season because, first ever 4-0 start in team history, which was incredible. Opened a new arena, got a shutout in the home opener, brand new arena. Everything felt like it was going right. And then all of a sudden the next 5 games happened and it was just loss after loss. it hit the middle of the season, had that 8-game losing streak, and it was just one of those. If they had picked up a point, just 1 point anywhere in any of these stretches, they would have made that playoff cut. So it just felt like one of those seasons where everything was going right until it wasn't. There was no real, oh, the wheels are falling off the bus. It's just, there's no more wheels. Like, they're gone. But I mean, it was a building season. We had a lot of rookies on this team to start the year. We had a lot of rookies on this team to finish this year. And like you said, better than last season. Didn't have a 15-game losing streak to finish the year. So, end that on a high note.
Well, let me put you on the spot for a minute. Who was there at any point did you kind of miss a player and say, wow, I really wish that we had X player on the team?
I'm fairly biased in that because I will say I wish Joachim Blichfeld was still here. You know, I love that player, loved watching him in juniors, loved everything that he brought to this team. It was a frustrating year last year because, you know, he himself had, I think he had like a power play goal record for the team. It was a big year and it just was like struggle after struggle for this team. And I don't think that there's any player that specifically I'm like, he would have pushed this team over that edge just because there were so many guys that did step up and did step into that role. But he's one of those guys where I was like, man, I wish you were still here. Like, that would have been a wild run.
One of the guys that I kind of had my eye on because, well, after the Burns trade, he was no longer in Chicago, but he was heading over there, was Etu Makiniemi. He kind of had his second half of the season last year derailed by an injury, but he looked like he'd been thriving a little bit over there with the CUDA. What did you see of him from his bounce back season this year?
Yeah, no, I mean, he started the season incredibly strong. I mean, all three CUDA goaltenders did. We had that tandem going of all three guys where it was just didn't matter who was in net. We're gonna have a good game. You know, he did get his call up to the Sharks. He looked pretty stellar in it, if I'm being honest. It was one of those, you know, it's a new experience for him. Obviously, gonna have some of those jitters, but he looked great this season. He did look, you know, a little more, I don't want to say uncomfortable than he did with Chicago, just because I think he had that like settled in already. Whereas here, I think he was just kind of getting used to the new environment, which not to say Chicago wasn't new for him, but it was just a different system. And he still looked great. So it was just one of those, when he did go down with an injury to finish this season too, I was just like, man, we could have seen so much. Like, he was on that path of just going up, and it would have been really fun to see how he ended the year.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. His mom used to follow me on Twitter, but she unfollowed me when he got traded. So like that kind of broke my heart. But you know, I'm still rooting for Etu anywhere he goes.
Oh yeah, me too. Absolutely. Like, he's one of those guys where, I mean, I know he's an RFA this year, but you know, seeing him back here next year, or even seeing him up with the Sharks next year, I'm going to be rooting for him no matter what.
4 out of 5 of the team's top point getters were rookies. Is this really the rebuild year, or was that last year?
For the Sharks or for the Barracuda?
For the Barracuda.
So I'm not going to say that either one was a rebuild year, because last year was kind of that tear down, like, all right, let's start over. This year was the, all right, let's get all of these future Sharks some time in North American pro hockey. And let's be honest, how many of these guys are going to be on this team next year and not up with the Sharks, or at least, you know, throughout the season, not getting all those calls. So you know, for the 5 being rookies, I mean, you have your Thomas Bordelot, you have your William Eklund, who, if Eklund starts the season with the Barracuda next year, I'm going to be shocked. You have Daniil Gushin, who, I mean, we all know how I feel about him. Well, most of us know how I feel about him. But Daniil Gushin is one of those guys where if he's not in the NHL by like mid-November next year, full time, I'm going to be confused. Thomas Bordelot, like I said, you know, he's got that experience already. The Sharks kept him up for, you know, the end of their season. He held his own. He looked good. Would have liked to maybe see some more production out of him, but that wasn't the part of his game that they needed to focus on. They knew he's going to be a producer. They were working on his physicality, and I think he showed that to end the year. And then you have Tristan Robbins, who started the season exceptionally strong and then hit like a little lull in the middle of the season where they were just working on the finer points of his game. And then he came back in the second half and just was like, hey guys, I'm back. I've put it all together and we're going to be just fine. But I don't know that I can say that, oh, this is a rebuild year for the Barracuda, because how many of those guys are going to be here? Like, it's just a question mark.
Do you think next year we're also going to be eulogizing them as we head into the playoffs, or do you think it's going to be a bit of a change? I mean, they're going to have the All-Star game and everything. They got to be pumped up over there in the Bay, right?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that we're going to be eulogizing them next year. I think that we're going to know who this team is and what they're about a lot sooner. You know, John McCarthy is going to be in his second year coaching this team. You have Kyle Hagel and Louis Mass, who have shown that, you know, they were ready to be at this level. It's just a new environment. We had 3 brand new coaches, an almost entirely brand new team. So of course, like, the system's still getting into place, and it's not just the Barracuda from the top down. So I think next season, just out of the gate, you're going to know exactly what this team is about.
All right. I love the optimism. We're going to kind of shift gears here, though, and look at some teams that are in the playoffs. No offense intended to the CUDA, but it's just that time of the year. And, you know, I've been on the wagon of a lot. It seems like the Pacific is from an outside Midwesterner's perspective, it looks very top heavy. You know, you got some real heavy hitters up at the top, and then they're kind of feasting a bit on the San Diegos and the Hendersons of the world. How's been these vibes over there on the West Coast for you?
It's been insane, like you said. I mean, you have your Calgarys and your Coachella Valleys, and let's like start there. Top 2 teams, you just every night you're going into those games being like, all right, what's this going to be? You're watching them face other teams, and I mean, you can say all you want about San Diego, but they weren't necessarily feasting on them all year. San Diego held their own and beat both of those teams. Something that, I'm going to be honest, San Jose did not do this year. Took him to overtime a couple times, but hadn't won a game against them. It is top heavy, but it's top heavy in a this could crumble at any moment feeling. Unless you're Calgary, and then, you know, you have your Dustin Wolf, your Oscar Dansk, you have Matthew Phillips. You can just list that entire team, and it doesn't matter where you're going with that. Whereas for Coachella Valley, like, you lose a goaltender, you lose a couple goal scorers, and it does feel like things were starting to fall apart once in a while for them, but then they'd get guys back and it'd be fine. So, and I mean, and then you have kind of like your middle of the pack, because you have like your Colorados, where any given night it can go either way.
Yeah. So, you know, we got a lot of real interesting matchups. Colorado against Ontario, Abbotsford, Bakersfield. I mean, well, then looking at the top here, Coachella Valley and Tucson. I mean, you know, the storylines are already there, but, you know, we'll just ask right now, does Tucson really have a snowball's chance in this one?
It depends. Is Seattle going to call some guys up at any point when they might need them? Like I said, Coachella Valley, it's one of those teams where you take 1 or 2 pieces away and anything can happen. And Tucson's kind of been stepping up. They've been that team that's rallying back. So, like in the game against Texas that knocked the CUDA out, they came back from a 4-0 deficit against the top team in the Central. It's just one of those moments where it's like, I want to say, no, this is going to be a Coachella Valley slam dunk. Like, there's no chance. But 1 or 2 pieces go down, and I mean, it's a best of 3, so there's not a lot of time for that to happen, but 1 or 2 pieces, and Tucson could run away with it.
Liz, I have a question for you, and you're going to have to help me out here. You notice I've been quiet this entire time. That's because I'm like on the other side of the continent from y'all in over here in Hershey. But like the Pacific Division feels like kind of an enigma to me, because, you know, it feels like, you know, it's very much like almost a separate league in a sense, because it's obviously we don't see any of them over here in Hershey. It's very, you know, different in that regard. We're kind of the old school side of things. And it's kind of like, you know, an old restaurant versus a new one type of thing, where it's just completely different, but they compete with each other, right? Mm-hmm. So my question is, you know, you guys had a couple of different teams. There's some new, a whole new matrix over there. It feels like, with some of the new teams How do you see it stacking up? I know the playoff format looks completely different. How do you see things playing out in the playoffs? Like, what's your bold prediction, honestly?
Oh, I don't know that I have a bold prediction. If I have to choose who's coming out on top, I'm never betting against Dustin Wolf and the Calgary Wranglers this season. To be fair, ever since juniors, I never bet against Dustin Wolf, and I say that as an avid Portland Winterhawks fan. So I was always rooting against Silvertips, but it's one of those you can't bet against Dustin Wolf because he can pull off some magic with those teams, and then you add in the firepower that they do have. But then I look at a team like the Hershey Bears, and I'm sitting there like them, Providence. It's two different styles of hockey, and I feel like you throw that up against a team like Calgary, and maybe it throws them off their game a little bit. Maybe it just changes the speed of things. But at the same time, maybe a team like Calgary is going to throw off Providence and just sit there. But if you get like a Providence-Calgary final, the goaltending in that matchup will be incredible. Like, I've just got to be honest with that.
Yeah, I'd be looking forward to that one. I've been riding Dustin Wolf's coattails since last year's Western Conference Finals. So I would love to see the Wranglers go on a run here. But if you had to pick a dark horse from the Pacific, that you can pick the two big C's, no Calgary, no Coachella. I'll even throw in no Colorado because they're another C. So who's got the best chance to make a run there?
Is it that? Wait. This is another question. Is it really that spread out? Because I've always talked about there being this kind of cliff in the Pacific Division, and like you're either on the top end or the bottom. But like, is there really that big of a cliff that if it's not a C, it won't get the C Calder Cup?
Honestly, right now, I see that playing out. Like, I want to say Tucson has that chance. I mean, honestly, if Tucson manages to take out Coachella Valley, I think that might be the fuel that they need, because that team has shown at the end of this season that they can bounce back from just about anything. Like, yeah, they ended on a losing streak. They hadn't flat out won a game in like 6 games, but they were picking up the points. And I think if they just find that finishing, and I think if beating Coachella Valley gets them that energy and that confidence that they need, I think they could do it. I don't really, and I hope Tucson fans don't take this the wrong way, I don't really want them to. I'm still mad at them. I would like Tucson to not make it. However, I am also one of those people who I'm like, I want the team that beat my team to be the team that wins it all, because then it makes me feel better. Like, cool, that's how it worked. That said, every team that made playoffs over the Barracuda beat the Barracuda, so we'll see.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wonder if that works for Griffins fans, because they kind of just lost to everyone all year. So that's a tough one. Do you guys have anything more as we're about to get started with Pacific Division playoffs here? All right. Well, Liz, you've been just wonderful as always. Let our audience know where can they find you and throw some chirps your way, because I know there's going to be some Tucson listeners that are going to be having you in their crosshairs.
You know what? And I love that. And honestly, Ontario fans, Colorado fans, if you want to come hang out, like I'm here for that too. Iowa fans, your besties. You can find me on my personal Twitter, which is just at Lizz Child, Lizz Child. If any of our Barracuda players do happen to watch this, it is not Lizz the Child, and if you know, you know. But you can also find me as the admin at SJ Barracuda. And then you can find my writing at area51sportsnet.com. You can find it at sjbarracuda.com. Maybe you'll find it on another site here soon. We'll see.
Ooh, I like it. Foreshadowing. Well, Liz, again, it was a pleasure having you on. And I mean, you're going to be joining me and watching a lot of these playoffs happening, because our beats just don't like, we're allergic to the postseason here. So thanks again. And, we'll be seeing you around.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on and listening to me ramble.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We've put them all in the dirt. We've filled the grave up. What else do we have to write on these headstones here?
You know what? I think it's important too. This is the first time we've had an expanded playoff. Well, like it is, I guess, right? With 32 teams up for grabs is what I'm trying to say, right? And someone's got to suck, right? Someone has got to suck. And you know what? I next year, I think early bold predictions. It's going to be Chicago. If Anaheim can't figure out what they're doing on the off season, it's going to be them as well because it's hard, right? Vegas has got to wake up and smell the roses and say, you know what? We can't just ditch our prospect pool forever. Belleville, okay. Let's figure out what we're doing in Ottawa, okay. Then send them down the pipe, right? Send some decent talent. Chicago, Grand Rapids, I think it'll have its day. I think Grand Rapids won't be in the Eulogy next year. I think that they've learned the way there's lessons learned here, right? And they didn't waste no time. This is my issue with some of the other teams is they haven't gone so quick. The fact that they cut the loose ends so quick to me says we want to try for next year. We're sorry, X fan base.
Yeah, I think that they want to get out ahead and establish what the direction of this team is going, because let's be real, there wasn't really a direction.
Well, what they did is they said, this is wrong. This is not right to lose this many games in the run of a season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Steve Yzerman came right out and was like, we were disappointed in what was going on. And as soon as that happened, I was like, uh-oh. Like, if I was the hot dog vendor in Grand Rapids, I would have been like, he's coming for me. and you know, they dropped the X. Mike Knubel is the only assistant coach left standing after all of that. Goaltending coaches, assistant coaches, head coach. It's a complete, we are rolling this carpet up and putting it to the side. I don't want to like say like I'm throwing it away because these are human beings I'm talking about. But they're bringing in new carpet and trying that out with you know, they're going to paint the walls and try and manifest just a different direction for this team, because I don't know if you've heard lately, but every general manager in the NHL will tell you the importance of these prospects playing long playoff runs. Well, this is the second year in a row of a team that's trying to rebuild their culture up there in the NHL as into a winner, and we're just going to be wallowing in the mud here. That is not going to happen in Grand Rapids. So I think you're going to see a lot of activity from Steve Yzerman, Sean Horkoff to fill this team up with competitors to get them back into the playoffs. Now, Chicago's a different story, man. Chicago, what are you doing? I feel like I'm about to write their eulogy this summer and before the season even starts. But I feel like we have to at least wait on it, right?
And this is the thing is, you know what? I could be wrong. Like, I hope I'm wrong, right? And they might get the run off of some really good goaltender, you know?
What if they do it? What if they do it? How much hair is Scott Housen going to rip out of his head if the Chicago Wolves go out and, like, make a run?
And this is the thing with the AHL, too. Like, some of these teams have had so many different affiliations over the years. Springfield is one I think of, right? They've just, Utica's had their fair share between the Devils and the Comets and the Comets again, and like whoever else, Springfield, the Falcons, the Thunderbirds, and all those teams that came and went. And I often think about that and say, at what point does the league pull the plug on Chicago and say this is a troublesome? And I know we're going way off topic here, but if they say if Chicago wants more than what the AHL and the NHL teams are willing to give up, clearly there's a bit of a problem here. All right. And Chicago can have a really great fan base. And I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry that your team is like this. Right. I should be saying this at your funeral, but I'm sorry that your team is like this. Right. Because you guys deserve better. You deserve a long-term team that's committed to you guys. I know it. I was there. I was in St. John's when the Jets left. It was horrible on fan morale. It was terrible. People are Montreal fans down there, and they were happy that they still had a team. But once the league lost faith in them, that was it. They were gone within 2 years. And I'm afraid that I could be foreshadowing something that I hope I'm not.
I mean, there's going to be a lot of eyes in Chicago this coming, not just before even the season, just this summer. You go into the off season when things open up. What is this team going to do? This is uncharted territory. I mean, I know there were independent teams in this league, but this is not your daddy's AHL anymore. This is business is operating differently. Attitudes are differently. I'm here to try and figure it out, and I'm at a loss for words.
It's happened in the coast, in the ECHL. I think that's important to kind of understand too, that maybe that was a sample size, right? It was kind of good. The most recent one that I remember, and again, I don't know the ECHL enough to comment on this fully, but I know that the Maine Mariners did it for a little bit. And I know that there was teams from like Boston and Ottawa and Montreal and whatever were sending players down there because it was so close, right? Like you didn't have to take a crazy journey, but all the same, like say if I'm the Boston Bruins, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have this really good talent. I want him playing with my talent. I want him playing with my, like, if I'm a defenseman, I want him playing with Brandon Bussey because I know that the two of them are going to get together one of these days, hopefully, right? I'm sure that's the hope for them at least, right? I don't want my defenseman going or Brandon Bussey going and playing in Chicago. Shag that.
This is going to be a team that's going to be totally self-sufficient. You're not going to rely on any. And what happens? What happens if you are tearing it up in Chicago? And let's say Columbus is calling, hey, we just had a couple of injuries at center. You're playing really well. Here's an NHL contract. What is the guy going to be like? Oh, well, I really like it down here. No, they're going to be like, let me see that pen. Before the ink's dry, he's out of Rosemont, and you are even further behind the 8 ball because it's not like you can just call up your NHL affiliate like, oh, hey, Jack Drury just left. Let's take Ryan Suzuki, and he can be our number one. Like, no, you don't have that. You don't have that. You gotta. I don't even know where you go. You go to the coast.
And well, how often? You got to think about too. How often in the run of a season does? And I know we're going way off topic here, but how often in the run of a season do you as a team say, "Oh, we don't have any room for this player. We're going to send him on loan somewhere"? Dylan Ferguson is a recent example. So, okay, you're going to get an ECHL goaltender who they didn't want him in Newfoundland and they didn't want him in Toronto, so he can go on Belleville. They'll have another goalie. Right? Is that just going to happen again? Right? Like I mentioned Jordan Binnington on the podcast before. He did it in Providence.
If that's what you're relying on to be competitive, you really don't have a snowball's chance.
No. And that's
cool.
So
we're already writing the Wolves 2024
Eulogy. I think that's the point that we're trying to make here, folks, is that we've just pre-written the Wolves eulogy, and they're on the list of we'll see you next year's.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a tasteful way to metaphor this, but I was like, I had something in mind, but that was definitely out of pocket, and I'm not putting it out into the internet because I will get dragged. Anyway, yeah. So before we start eulogizing more 2024 teams, we've kind of covered them all. I like this. This was a lot of fun. We should do this more often.
And you know what? Maybe let's throw it out to the Twitterverse and ask you guys who's going to be in the eulogy next year, right? And was the eulogy fair? Were we fair in saying that Henderson just sucked? San Diego just sucked.
San Diego was the worst team ever. They didn't just suck.
Statistically the worst.
And the Griffins went 2 for 2, or 2 and 2 against them. That's like what I imagine the other team losing to Airbud is like the Griffins, like, dude, we just went 500 against San Diego. Like,
we just fielded the Slapshot team, and we've come away with 1 point in the 4-game season series.
Oh, jeez, I don't even want to think about that. Okay.
Enough of this. Folks, it's been a fantastic season.
It's been
we have lots of exciting playoff coverage, including on the Field Pass Hockey app. On the fieldpasshockey.com, you can check out some teams that aren't eulogized yet or who are soon to be eulogized, and we'll be sure to bring you more on that as it comes. But for now, on behalf of Corey, who is here, and Andrew, I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you when we see you.
This has been the Holy Grail Podcast. Have a question or a topic suggestion? Hit us up on Twitter or drop us an email. For the latest news across the American Hockey League and the rest of minor league hockey, download the Field Pass Hockey app, now available in the Apple and Android app stores.